Hello students, I am Dr. Himanshu Kandpal, Assistant Professor English, Government MS College for Women, Bikaner. Today we are going to start a new poem, Sohrab and Rustum, written by one of the Victorian poets, Matthew Arnold. We will begin with introduction to the poet. About the poet, Matthew Arnold, son of Thomas Arnold, received his university education at Oxford, where he developed a close relationship with Arthur Hugh Clough. He served as inspector of schools for 35 years. This job gave him immense exposure to social life in Victorian England, as his primary task was to travel extensively and observe as well as collect first-hand information about social conditions of the time. This exposure became the source of raw material for his later works. For 10 years, he was professor of poetry at Oxford. His early poems were published in 1849, but gradually Arnold turned increasingly to prose, writing essays on literary topics, education and social issues that established him as a leading critic of the day. He also made attempts to secure the improvement of education, particularly secondary education in England. His poetry has a fine classical qualities, that is, perfect lucidity of expression, clearness of style, and the absence of far-fetched images and involved construction. His important works include Thesis, Rugby Chapel, Essays in Criticism, and Culture and Anarchy. So we can see that Matthew Arnold, with his philosophical bent of mind, was nearly always preoccupied with culture, discipline, and moral grandeur. As a scholar, poet, and critic, he was enamored of ancient Greek masters. He was not only a poet and a philosopher, but also a profound scholar and culture critic. He ranks with Robert Browning, Thomas Hardy, Charles Dickens, and Ruskin in many ways. He is a great genius. What Dr. Samuel Johnson was in the 18th century England, Matthew Arnold was in the 19th century England. Arnold's work is a veritable goldmine of ideas in all walks of Victorian life. Now we move to the poem. Introduction to the poem. Sohrab and Rustum. Sohrab and Rustum is a blank verse poem. Blank verse poem is poem written in unrhymed iambic pentameter lines. And here it is an extract from Matthew Arnold's long narrative poem Sohrab and Rustum, that was published in 1853. So in this poem, Arnold has retold the story originally written by the Persian poet Firdausi. The theme of the poem is highly tragic. The poet portrays the impact of a sad and gloomy situation which occurs unexpectedly. The message conveyed through this narrative is that fate is all powerful and it is beyond the capacity of the individual to know how it works. Man is a mortal being. He does not know how fate is going to work, and it is all powerful. The poet highlights the finite nature of men's capacities and the infinite stretch of destiny, which unfolds much more than men can even imagine. What the message conveyed in the poem is that destiny works in very different ways. It is beyond the capability of men to recognize what lies in his or her future. Even he is not able to imagine what he is destined for. So the poem opens with Sohrab lying wounded, with his life gradually escaping from his grasp. He is dying. His father Rustum stands by him as he oscillates between life and death. The struggle ends and Sohrab lies motionless in the desert with a broken and distressed Rustum by his side. This contrast is symbolic of the fact that nature goes on its way without any regard to the personal tragedy of any person. Not only this, even the armies on the both sides resumed the war in a routine manner. So, what the story is about, Rustum fought with Sohrab, unaware of the fact that his opponent was his own son. This was in fact the greatest tragedy. He had never seen his son, and Sohrab was mortally wounded by Rustum. Rustum later on came to know that he had wounded his own son, and now Rustum sat by Sohrab's side while he breathed his last. It was Rustum who drew the spear from his body, and the blood came gushing out. It was Rustum was mortally wounded Sohrab, and Rustum mortally wounded Sohrab in a combat. Soon he came to know that Sohrab was his own son, but it was too late. Soon Sohrab died. So, this is all the story about Sohrab and Rustum. So, in the concluding part, when the two armies, people in the two camps soon dispersed, and they went to their respective camps. The Persians took their meal in the open field in the south, and the Tartars by the river bank. So Rustum and his son were left alone. In the concluding part, the poet shifts his focus from Rustum and Sohrab and depicts the beauty of nature. Originating from the plateau of Pamir, the river Oxus flow majestically in a wavy path till at last its waves merge with the Aral Sea. So here what the writer here wants to convey the idea that the river Oxus floats undisturbed, majestically, undisturbed by the conflicts of the two armies, and the river appeared to have forgotten the quick flow of its earlier course. So the movement of the river is in fact an implied comment upon the nature of life. Life also originates, and after completing its course like the river, it has to ultimately merge with the infinite. Thus the poem reaches philosophical heights and explores the mortality of nature. So through the poem which is based on Firdausi's work, Matthew Arnold, the great Victorian poet, departs from the parent poem. Arnold is an expert craftsman as a poet. In his Sohrab and Rustum, he omits the whole preliminary account and allows us to gather the threads from conversation between the characters. Sohrab and Rustum approximates the structural conditions of the epic. The theme and characters are noble, and the style is dignified and stately. This is all about the poet and the poem. Thank you.